about last week where he has played a little bit better. What a pass by Rondo.
That might be the dagger.
Why not? Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league?
The Lakers repeat back-to-back titles. The LA Lakers, the 2010 NBA champions.
Man, we really knocking on the door to 300k, sensational. If you enjoyed today's video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. Let's get to 300k before August 30th. There is nothing that anybody can get me for my birthday that really does the trick anymore, but hey, 300k might. On another note, today we are continuing the NBA 2010 series, and I am going to be ranking the greatest playoff series of the 2010s. Very self-explanatory. Got it? Good, let's get it. Actually, one important detail, almost skated right over it. The NBA Finals are not going to be a part of this list. That is going to be a separate list. Literally by default, if we were to add the NBA Finals to this list, most of it would be final series just because of the intensity and normally the rivalries that you have coming from the East and West. It would block out a lot of other great series, on top of the fact that I pretty much already ranked the NBA Finals, or I ranked the championship teams. I did something very close to that already, so it would be extremely redundant to add those here as well, being that we already talked about them. But yes, the NBA Finals list do not belong on the list with regular playoff series. They just really can't compete. I had to come back and add the Spurs and Thunder from the 2012 Western Conference Finals. Somehow this slipped my mind, and thank God before I released this video. NBA TV, for no reason at all, they had my back. They were watching over me. They had the playbacks of games 5 and game 6. And it was an immediate reminder that this series didn't go 7, but it was a banger. This might be the only 6-game series I have on this list, but some 6 games they were. There was only one game that actually ended in a blowout, which was game 3. Every other game was close, and then game 5 and game 6, those were both nail biters. Those both came down to like the last minute or two for the Thunder to be able to overtake San Antonio, and what I want people to remember about this series, besides how great it actually was what a feat this was for the Thunder. It didn't really hit me until I was watching it last night and I was watching the trophy presentation, and Ernie Johnson turns to Kevin Durant and asks, "Are you sure that you're 23 years old?" And I'm like, damn, I'm 23 right now. At my age, Kevin Durant was averaging 30 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks against a seasoned San Antonio Spurs team to go to the NBA Finals. Not only that, but to start this series, the Thunder were down 0-2. A young team going up against the Spurs down 0-2 for a chance to go to the NBA Finals. That is probably a death sentence in every other scenario. But especially towards the end of the series, the Thunder were just too quick. Russell Westbrook, 23 years old, Harden, 22. It really makes you wonder what potential did this trio have had they stayed together. James Harden probably never becomes as individually great as he currently is, but if you go back and actually watch the footage from that series, it was a true flash of what this team could have been throughout the 2010s. At number 9, I would like to place the 2018 Warriors and Rockets. In the Western Conference Finals of the Warriors' second year with KD, the Rockets became the first team to even give them a decent challenge in a playoff series. Before then, they had never lost more than one game in a playoff series. Games 4 and 5, where the Rockets were able to take the series lead, were absolute bangers, and it really looked like Houston had done the impossible before Chris Paul's hamstring went out. That goddamn hamstring. How much of his career was ruined by a hamstring in the 2010s? I'm gonna say it probably cost him a championship in the year 2018. However, this series is going to come in 9th because watching the Golden State Warriors come back in 2 consecutive games after the Houston Rockets lost Chris Paul, it just wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was nothing new to watch the Golden State Warriors go down by like 10 plus points when they had Kevin Durant and then come back out of nowhere and still win the game. So when Houston built those big leads in elimination games but they only had Harden, you kinda knew it wasn't gonna last. But the hype for this series was off the charts. By adding Chris Paul, the Rockets had one of the best offenses ever in 2018, and then you put them on the same court with the team that has the most firepower ever. This series could have really gone much higher, but not having Chris Paul for 2 pivotal games, it felt like we were robbed then, and it still feels like we were robbed today. The Pacers and Heat was a very unexpected competitive playoff series because going through that whole year, we had watched Carmelo Anthony with the best Knicks team he had ever had up to that point. The Pacers were pretty fresh off of losing Danny Granger because if you think back to 2012, it was Granger and Paul George kind of leading the way, so this was a totally different team. PG was very young, and this was the best Heat team ever. This was the one that won 27 games straight. This was the best LeBron ever. The Pacers came out of the gate swinging and nearly upset the Miami Heat. Of course, there was an epic defensive collapse and LeBron James was able to get a game-winning layup, but that's what made this series so good. The scores weren't close, but that loss did not crush the Pacers. This went 7 games. Roy Hibbert, his career practically ended in this series because with the Heat's lack of size, he was able to just do whatever he wanted. He averaged 22 points and 10 rebounds, so when you thought of him next to David West and then Paul George up and coming, it looked like the Pacers might be the next big thing if they were able to dethrone the Heat. So it was a very nice surprise in a year where it looked like the Heat were just going to steamroll their way since there was no more Derrick Rose, the Celtics had aged out, and then the Knicks were upset. This was a very welcome surprise, and it is definitely one of the more iconic series, even though it's not the best or most competitive in terms of like the scores at the end of the games, but there's just something about the Paul George and LeBron duels that really sticks out from the 2010s. How about the 2015 Clippers and Spurs first round? First of all, these were the defending champion San Antonio Spurs. 2014 is one of the best teams ever. They come into 2015 and have to play the Clippers, who are also a very good team, a championship contender that year. That was a year that the West had multiple championship contenders, maybe 3 or 4, and 2 of them meet in the first round in this series. It was up to the Spurs to protect their title and try to repeat to wash away that memory of 2013, and by this point we were about 3 years into the Clippers Lob City thing, so it had produced no results. It was very disappointing, and nobody believed that their success was about to start against a Spurs team that had looked very good throughout the regular season, and that was fresh off of a title. This series ends up having one of the more exciting Game 7s throughout the 2010s. It's do or die time, and what happens? Chris Paul's good old goddamn hamstring. That's a great name for his 2010 struggles, because that's what it basically boils down to. Anyways, this is one of those times that he can play through it because it happened kinda early in that game. There was still plenty of ball left, and he flips up a prayer to send the San Antonio Spurs home. Blake Griffin damn near dies trying to make sure the ball doesn't come off or that he can rebound or tip slam it. That's a very underrated moment in that year's playoffs. And Tim Duncan passes the torch to Chris Paul. That hug at the end, Chris Paul is crying. That was the passing of the torch. That was Tim Duncan telling Chris Paul it's finally your time. Well, we all know what ended up happening, but it meant so much for the Clippers and Chris Paul specifically to unseat the defending champion San Antonio Spurs. LeBron James called Chris Paul after that game, showered him with praise, and then just hung up. I always took that as LeBron's excitement that he was not going to have to see the Spurs again. So that series is going to go 7th. Game 7 really props it up because a lot of the other games were blowouts, but it would have meant so much more if the Clippers had gone on to win the championship and beat the Warriors throughout that year. Yeah, that series could have been part of a very monumental run for Chris Paul's legacy and Lob City overall. Oh, the Clippers and Warriors 2014. Who remembers when that was actually a rivalry? That could have its own 2010s video. Chris Paul versus Steph Curry. What happened there with Curry overtaking him as the best point guard in the league. The fact that this was one of the only true rivalries throughout the 2010s. The ones where the teams actually didn't like each other and they were getting into scuffles. Well, yeah, 2014 was a year where we didn't really know who the Warriors were yet. We were more interested in Lob City, but we knew that Golden State was up and coming because of what they had done in the 2013 playoffs, and it's just kind of unfortunate that they saw the Clippers this year in the first round. 4 out of the 7 games of this series were decided by 5 points or less. It's one of the only playoff series I can think of throughout the 2010s where guys actually had bad blood for each other because of earlier events, and it was a great series. It's very interesting to look back on 5 years later considering what happened because it really was a landmark. Think about it. This was the last time Chris Paul had the upper hand on Steph Curry. This was the last time the Clippers had an upper hand on the Warriors. After that, the Warriors they broke through. Steve Kerr was definitely a better coach for them. He used Steph Curry better than Mark Jackson did. And after this series, the Clippers spent the rest of the decade basically getting dogged out by the Warriors. The rest of the Lob City years anyways. They actually provided an excellent challenge this year despite the whole talent disparity. Starting out the top 5, we have the Clippers again. They were really that close to success. They were in 3 of my top 10 playoff series throughout the 2010s. This one was against the Thunder, and I don't know if you guys see what I see, but not only was this series wildly entertaining from the talent aspect and the competitiveness, the jersey colors just mixed beautifully. That's a really random fact, not gonna elaborate, but it added to the spectacle. 4 out of these 6 games were decided by 6 points or less, so you had some nail biters. The talent that was supposed to be on display was on display. You had Kevin Durant averaging 33, 10, and 5, Chris Paul with 22 and 11. This was just an all-out battle between 2 teams that could have easily made the NBA Finals, and yet they didn't because the Spurs existed. Also in this series, you have one of the more controversial playoff games throughout the 2010s, the ending of Game 5. You know, the questionable foul on Chris Paul, the whole situation with Matt Barnes, and the fact that the Clippers almost had that game won. They were up a pretty sizable amount at the end of that game, and it was on the Thunder's home floor, and they would have taken a 3-2 lead back to Los Angeles. 2014 was a very good Clippers team, and I actually remember Steve Smith's prediction was that we were going to have the Clippers in Miami in that year's finals. They were good enough to convince some people that was possible. That was probably Blake Griffin's best year in the NBA at the time, and it was just yet another one of those moments where you thought the Clippers were finally going to break through. At number 4, I have a series that a lot of you probably don't even remember. The 2010 Celtics and Cavaliers, the second round of the playoffs. Not only was this an amazing series, this is one of those like the Clippers and Warriors where you might be able to say there was some bad blood, although it wasn't really all that bad, it was just really hyper competitive. By this point, LeBron James had spent about 2 or 3 years, this was actually his 3rd year involved with the Celtics, and coming into a season thinking he was going to have to dethrone them. He had not yet done it, although the Cavaliers were the best team in the league that year. They'd won around 61 games, and the Celtics, in everybody's mind, they were old. Kevin Garnett was back from knee surgery. Paul Pierce had a knee infection that year. He had to have a random surgery that cost him about 2 weeks. They had signed Rasheed Wallace, who was helpful but past his prime. And so coming into that series, the Cavaliers were the favorites, which is a fact that people forget. Now they look back and say, how could anyone have ever expected LeBron James or the Cavaliers in general to win that series? But if you were watching basketball back then, it was all Cavs and LeBron. I remember Kenny Smith saying that the Celtics could lose to the Bobcats in the playoffs that year. That's how crucial it was. So this was a very competitive series, but it was also very important to the development of LeBron James. He realized at that point that with the composition of his roster, and the makeup of the rest of the Eastern Conference, but mainly the Celtics, that his career was going nowhere fast trying to carry Cleveland every year. They could have amazing regular seasons, they could play great basketball together, that's what made them such a great team. But the Celtics had that ability to be great when it actually mattered. So as poorly as the Celtics had played throughout the season, this was an upset. It forced LeBron James to the Heat, so in that way it was also a very impactful series because had LeBron had beaten them that year, who knows if he still goes to Miami. At number 3, we have yet more of LeBron James trying to conquer the Celtics, and this series is also another one of those impact series. The Miami Heat had already beaten Boston the year before, so that's where you saw LeBron and Dwayne Wade hugging like they just won the championship, and it was a very big moment and a very big step in their careers to be able to have done that. But the Celtics were right there next year with a depleted roster, yet they had a 3-2 lead after Paul Pierce had nailed a game-clinching 3 in LeBron's face. It was one of those moments that truly put LeBron's legacy to the test because you thought that he had conquered the Celtics part of his career, and here they are again. By this point, we'll probably say that it was a bad blood series because it was the old Big 3 in the Celtics versus the new Big 3, the new and improved Big 3 in the Miami Heat, although Chris Bosh didn't really play to the end of that series, and it was going to mean a lot to Boston to be able to reassert their dominance. Had they been able to do that, they probably would have sent the Miami Heat into a death spiral, being that they had just lost to the Mavericks in the 2011 finals, and then coming back to lose before the finals the very next year. That just would have been devastating. That prompted LeBron James to have probably his best game ever. Game 6 in the Garden against this team that he had to conquer again, and that game would have just meant so much more than just elimination. That game combined with that run probably elevated him a couple of spots on the all-time list. And then overall, it was a competitive series. You had game 1 that went into overtime or maybe even double overtime where Rondo was hitting jump shots somehow and had like 40 points. Another game came down to Dwayne Wade almost hitting a game winner. For a series that was already known to be a rivalry, it really lived up to the hype and definitely deserves a 3rd spot here. Oh man, the Warriors and the Thunder in 2016. Looking back, it is so disappointing that Kevin Durant decided to go to Golden State after this, because what we saw in this series, it made us so excited for the future of Westbrook and Kevin Durant versus Steph Curry and the Warriors. That's what we were looking forward to, and that series did not disappoint. It was the one time we got to see these two teams play in the playoffs. You know the Thunder and specifically Westbrook probably wanted that series, because by this point you had Curry come up and kinda steal their thunder. See, what you had here was the two young teams throughout the 2010s that had finally grown up. The Thunder came up in the very early 2010s and established themselves by 2012, and then the Warriors started to come up around 2013 and fully established themselves by 2015. One side you got Westbrook and KD, the other you got the young core with Klay, Steph, and Draymond. So finally they meet in 2016 to say who truly wears the crown after the Spurs are gone. And being that the Warriors had just won the championship in 2015, the Thunder played like the team that had something to prove. Steph Curry was a bit hobbled by injuries, so the Thunder jumped out to a commanding 3-1 lead. And I say commanding that way because those two games in Oklahoma, they crushed them in such a way that 73-9 tag was about to become an absolute joke. Then what else do you have? You got Westbrook and KD up there snickering about Curry's defense. It all triggers a comeback. You get Game 6 Klay, which is probably one of the most impactful games of the 2010s, and then a nail-biting Game 7. This was truly an incredible series between two incredible teams. As a matter of fact, Andre Iguodala stated that the Oklahoma City Thunder were the best team in the 2016 playoffs. He might not have been wrong. They had shooting, they had defense, they had size, they had speed. The Warriors just had more shooting, and especially towards the end of the 2010s, that seemed to prevail. I had to do it, man. I had to do it. The 2019 Raptors and Sixers. You know how I know this was an amazing series worthy of the #1 spot? Normally what ends up happening is time passes, we get nostalgic, and then we look back at something and say, huh, that was awesome. No, I can look back at the Raptors and Sixers, what, 2-3 months later? This was an amazing series. Could not believe what I was watching, specifically from Kawhi Leonard. The man is hobbling around. We know he's got that problem with his quad, and he puts up 35 and 10. And those were not empty stats. Those were stats that were winning his team crucial games. It was a performance that we had not really seen since 2009 when LeBron James did something similar against the Orlando Magic, except his team ended up losing. The Raptors could have very well have lost this series, except Kawhi nails the game winner, the first ever walk-off game winner in a Game 7. That was on top of the fact that there were 3 games in this series that you would call swing games. Games that could have just gone either way. So we could have been watching the Sixers in the conference finals and maybe even the finals because they matched up quite well with the Bucks. It was also incredible watching this series because you knew there was a certain pressure on Philly to try to get this done, because you didn't know if they were going to bring this same talented group back. You had 4 star players, Tobias Harris, Butler, Embiid, and Simmons. We thought it was possible that 1 or 2 of them were going to leave, and one of them did. So it was one of the best shots they were probably going to get at a title. And the game winner, that's just a moment that anybody who was watching it live, they're never going to forget where they were. Watching the ball hang on the rim, the first time it hit the rim, most of us probably thought that we were going to overtime, and then to see it fall and try to digest what had happened. To watch Marc Gasol having to console Joel Embiid, this series was amazing. I think it was better than any other series throughout the 2010s, but hey, you are free to argue. Make sure to leave your list in the comment section below. Make sure to subscribe, especially if you're new here. We are this close to 300k. Also hit the like button, share the video. Let's get as many people's opinions as we can on these 2010s list. Oh yeah, and make sure to hit the notification bell next to my name if you want notifications when these lists actually drop. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.